Hi, and welcome to this new ReachX with me episode. My name is Mehdi, I'm with ReachX, and we are welcoming today Jean-Pierre, who is an advisor on the platform, along with Chris. Hi to both of you.
Hi, good evening.
I'm Eddie.
It's good to see both of you, and I know that how much you both like the topic of leadership. So we're going to be discussing about leadership today. But maybe before kicking off, about the leadership topic, would you like to introduce yourself, Jean-Pierre and Chris?
Okay,
Shall we start with Jean-Pierre?
okay. Thank you, Mehdi. Well, I won't hide the fact that I'm French thanks to my accent. I've been living in England now for a year. I've been for 30 years a CEO, founder, or managing directors of different SMEs in France, and I completely changed direction a year and a half ago. Let's say those 30 years gave me a bit of a roller coaster of what entrepreneurship could mean, from listing a company on the stock market to receivership, and everything in between. And a year and a half ago, I went for 5 months of training as an executive business coach to really be able to sit next to leaders and CEOs instead of being the doers. And I've been working since in this field of business, and most of the time with the leadership as the backbone of the conversations.
That's amazing. And so, what about you, Chris?
Well, Mehdi, I trained as an engineer. I did quite a bit of engineering early on. I then got into sales and marketing, general management. I set up companies here and abroad. And then about 20 years ago, I went out on my own, initially as a business advisor, but eventually I graduated to coaching one-on-one, coaching CEOs, directors, because I found that that was the most effective way of impacting their business and bringing value. As opposed to focusing on the business, I was focusing on the leadership of the business. And I find that very rewarding, very challenging, and that's really why I'm here today.
That's amazing. So I would like to kick off with a question that is, quite easy and quite straightforward. A lot of people are talking these days about leadership, without knowing the exact definition of leadership, on its own, right? So I want to understand first, what do you mean by leadership? And how would it differ, from management? Like, how do you differentiate between both? Because obviously you can be a leader without being a manager, and vice versa. And you can be both. You can actually tell us, can we be both? But yeah, first tell us, if in terms of leadership, what do we mean by leadership?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Mehdi, because leadership has been there for decades or centuries, and it's definitely not something new. However, it's been definitely a hot topic for a few years now. And maybe it's just in a nutshell, I'd like to use Colin Powell and a citation he made, which is leadership is the art of accomplishing more than the science of management says it's possible. And when I say in a nutshell, because basically probably uh, fantasize the fact that management is very much relying on skills that can be learned, that can be assessed, often with objectives that can be looked upon. And on the other side, leadership is definitely far more related to the state of mind, in the way the leader is willing and able to engage with his environment, whatever the circumstances of the business are. And I think this is, like you said, a very tricky one, because in an SME especially, juggling and finding the right balance between acting as a manager and acting as a leader is sometimes the receipt in order to for the leader himself, but also for the company to secure a long-lasting and efficient running of the company. And uh, and 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 the one that I like is always being a leader means that you need to have followers, and sometimes, especially in fast-growing environment, you tend to forget that when you're caught in the action of the daily management of the situation, and you overlook or you forget that those followers are here. And probably a last interesting fact, I read an article from the Harvard Business Review that was made a couple of years ago about a review for over 3 years of the investment that companies made worldwide in leadership program for their executives or leaders. And you're talking 300 billion plus of dollars invested, and the return on investment 3/4 of the time is far more deceptive than anticipated, because leadership is taught as any other management skills, and unfortunately, like I said earlier, leadership is more a state of mind and posture than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd completely agree with you, Jean-Pierre, on that. I think the two do get confused. Leadership is another dimension. And for me, you can't be a good manager without leading to some extent, and you can't be a good leader without managing to some extent. You can't completely separate them in a practical situation. What I'd like to do, though, to answer that question is to give you a metaphor, and leave our listeners and our viewers to work it out for themselves. So you'll all be familiar with throwing a pot. You take a lump of clay, you stick it on a wheel that's spinning, and you put a hand inside it and a hand on the outside, and you use both hands to gradually form the pot into shape. But to do that, you have to have one hand inside and you have to have a hand on the outside. The outside hand is constraining, and the inside hand is tending to push out. And the balance of those two is critical. Now, the metaphor is that the outside hand is management and the inside hand is leadership. And when you get balance right, you can make beautiful things.
That's a really great analogy. I really like that, and I think that that answers actually a lot of the misconceptions around the theme of leadership, and the themes, both themes actually, the leadership one and the management one. I guess that it's slightly more, unfortunately, amplified these days with these, figures of and people and like entrepreneurs that are successful, etc. And then some of them are actually not necessarily good managers; they're good leaders. And then so thank you very much for clarifying that. And just to follow up on that, from your experience, and both of you, really, Jean-Pierre and Chris, when you want to, work on your leadership, when you want to work on this kind of like inside firsthand that just Chris mentioned right now, that he's working on the pot from the inside. Do you usually help CEOs with some kind of key topics, or founders? Doesn't have to be CEO necessarily, but in fast growing companies, in scale ups, do you usually help them? So with some kind of key elements, and do you know if there are some key topics as well that they use in order to be aware that when it comes to leadership?
I'm gonna step in. Sorry, Chris.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, probably, and just very quickly refer to my own experience, and probably 5, 10, 15 years ago, when I was in this leading situation, the notion of leadership was very blurry, and I knew the word. Probably I was sometime acting as a leader as such, but it was something very blurry, and especially like you said, in the, let's say, 4 or 5 years with the frenzy about investment funds, rounds and rounds and rounds and building up and whatever, there's an additional pressure of how, in terms of time scale, you have to deliver when you are the leader, or when you are the executive teams, and this is bringing such additional pressure that, in answer to your question, maybe it's probably anticipation. would be the key topic from my perspective, because I'm going to try to be as good an as analogy as Chris wants. But when you are looking at commercial air pilot, there is a very clear road for success if you want to grow on the size of the plane you are dealing with, and whatever you experience. You're on a twin engine, whatever number of hours. If you want to move to a jumbo one, you need to be able to go through a very specific process in order to adjust, to adapt, and to be ready for the next step. And this is exactly the same for in terms of leadership. That the temptation for many leaders is to say, okay, what has been working when the company was 5, 10, 50 people, that's going to work when you're 100, 500. And that is where the mistake starts. And this is where going back to the state of mind, to the mindset, and the anticipation, you need to work on a daily basis in order to make sure that the nature of the interaction, the nature of your positioning as a leader evolves, and therefore you anticipate with what's coming next if you want to be ready for when the company is going to be 500 people or 1,000.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to expand on that a little, for me, what I've discovered over the last few years is that a handful of key areas that leaders need to be aware of and be very, very alert to, and to anticipate, as Jean-Pierre says. And these include purpose, vision, culture, delegation, and resilience. And unless they have a degree of skill and effectiveness within those five, things get tough very, very quickly. So the anticipation is key, but the context of the anticipation has to be within at least those five areas.
It's super interesting what was just mentioned, and about as well the balance. I like this kind of idea of a balance as well. I want to understand if there is one skill, critical skill, that if you overlook it as a CEO or as a founder, you completely miss the game. Are there kind of any kind of leadership that is like a leadership critical skill, and generally speaking as well, and broadly speaking, like if you miss that kind of leadership critical skill, what will happen? That's a tough one.
No, but that's a good one, because as much as we've been saying and bouncing back to the early statement about how important the balance between management skills and leadership is essential. And at the end of the day, on the long run, and again, probably a strong emphasis on companies that are aiming to have a growth, and sometimes a very fast growth, is definitely the leadership is the glue that will secure the alignment of the team, especially with the growth of the team. And everything that Chris said earlier on, just a minute ago, about the vision, the purpose, and everything, it's part of creating that glue. But in order to make sure that this alignment is secure, going back to your point, Mehdi, is as a leader, in terms of anticipating properly, in terms of making things happen on the long run, then you have to be in the right mindset. Sorry to come back to that, in order to understand where you're good at, where you have weaknesses, and therefore being able also to accept that being a leader is building the right team around you in order to be part of the equation on the long run, and therefore create an environment that will be sustainable, and where the company and yourself as the guy in charge will grow.
Yeah, and just following on from that, the key skill for me is self-awareness, and you've touched on that, Jean-Pierre. self-awareness going well beyond just knowing your strengths and weaknesses. It's being able to observe your own inner dynamics, your cognitive and emotional dynamics from moment to moment as much of the time as possible. Because when you lose sight of those, when you lose connection with those, then things go wrong. So a very quick example, a lot of people, leaders will unconsciously employ other people who are not stronger than they are in certain areas because there's a subconscious threat. And that is a very dangerous path to go on. We should be aiming to get the best people around us far better at what they do than we can be.
Wise words, and thank you very much for mentioning them, Chris. It's the importance as well of synergies between people. We are not like smart on our own, right? There's an effort, there's a collective intelligence there to be put in place in order to kind of advance a little bit. In terms of when you think about leadership challenges, and we spoke about leadership, you help leaders to kind of overcome these challenges. If you have to give our listeners right now some top tips, and especially for those who are facing leadership challenges, what would those be?
Should I go ahead, Chris, again?
Please do. Yes, after you.
All right. To make a long story short, definitely, and going back to the self-awareness that Chris was mentioning a second ago, is trust. Trust, from my point of view, is a cornerstone of building a strong leadership environment. And the second one, which is maybe surprising, is that especially when you have been at the beginning of the company, when you have been sort of the guy in charge and it's growing, then you need to prepare yourself for two things. First one is you won't always be the one who has the answer. You have to be more and more the one who is prepared to ask the questions, to make sure that the people around you coming with a situation are not only looking at you as the one with the answer, the one, but more the one that will help them to grow and bring the answer to themselves. And the other part is also leadership is often linked to innovation, but let's say the dark side of innovation is often related to failure. And as a leader, you have also to be prepared to accept failure, what it means, and how much it helps you to grow as a leader, and for you again, and for the company as a whole.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm just going to add one top tip, and that is rest, R-E-S-T. And it sounds obvious. We all get rest, but do we? When you actually look at the dynamics of rest and people's habits, very few people get the quality rest that they need to be at the top of their game. And I am constantly teaching, essentially, very, very senior executives how to get proper rest in order that they can return to their activity fully refreshed. Sounds like a no-brainer. Unfortunately, it's not. And it's one of the reasons why we have a pandemic, not just of COVID, but also of mental health problems.
Yeah, that's a super valid point. And just doubling down on that, Chris, what would you define as proper rest? Can you give us some examples?
Yes, proper rest is not just physical rest, but it's mental and emotional rest. Now, the very finest rest that you can get is not sleep, because we've all gone to sleep and woken up knackered because we've had all kinds of dreams going on. What we need is conscious rest, whereby the mind can be allowed just to calm down. Now, the best way of doing that is meditation, without a doubt. Meditation is not a religious exercise. It is a secular activity, and it is the most effective way I know of allowing unwanted energies to dissipate, to die down, and to allow yourself to be fully refreshed. It's very, very simple. And you know, if anyone wants a quick guide, I can certainly give them an outline practice that they may find very beneficial.
Super cool. Well, thank you very much, Chris. It was super insightful. Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre, for joining us today. Thanks to both of you, and looking forward to maybe having you soon again as part of this series. It was super insightful, and I'm sure that a lot of people who were a little bit in the fog, you know, about leadership and about management, and also who don't take what Chris just said, issues of rest very seriously, would benefit from this chat. So thank you very much to both of you.
So welcome.
Thank you.